welcome back to my channel 5 Minute Economics, where I teach economic concepts in a span of just 5 minutes. The topic for today is trade cycles and anti-cyclical policies, which is a very important macroeconomic topic. In today's video, I'll be discussing about the features of trade cycle, all the 4 phases of trade cycle, along with the anti-cyclical policies which help to control these violent fluctuations. So yeah, what are we waiting for? Let's get started. Also guys, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel in case you haven't already, and do follow me on Instagram on my handle 5 Minute Economics. So firstly guys, let me explain to you what exactly is a trade cycle. Trade cycle, also known as a business cycle, are basically wave-like fluctuations in the level of economic activity. They are cyclic upward and downward movements, and they occur due to the changes in or increase or decrease in the output, income, employment and prices. So this is what ideally a trade cycle looks like, where we have wave-like fluctuations, as you can clearly see. I will be discussing each phase in detail in the later part of the video, but let me introduce you to what exactly does it look like. Here we see guys that we have 4 phases. The first one, we can start with recovery. Recovery is a phase when we are getting back to normalcy. After that we have expansion, which is the main boom phase, also known as prosperity. Then we come to a phase of recession, which is a downward movement, and ultimately we reach to the lowest part, which is a depressionary phase, okay, like the depression of 1930s or the 2008 financial crisis, which led to the economy in a depressionary phase. 2 things which you should keep in mind: this is the peak part and this is the trough part. So highest part is known as the peak and the lowest part is known as the trough. So keep in mind this picture when I explain you all the 4 phases of trade cycle. So now moving ahead to the features of trade cycles, which are very important and one should know all of them by heart. First one being they are cyclical fluctuations. You just saw in the diagram I drew that they are wave-like, cyclical, upward and downward movement. Secondly, all phases should occur for a trade cycle to be complete. So we should have all the 4 phases: recovery, expansion, recession, depression. Only then we get one typical trade cycle. Otherwise, a trade cycle isn't complete without all the 4 phases. Next, I just discussed the wave-like movements part. Repetitive in nature. We just saw that they are like upward, downward. They are repetitive in nature. Next guys, there is no uniform duration. So some trade cycles might last very long, while some might be short, while there might be some medium term cycles. So there is no uniform duration of a trade cycle. Then next, there are alternate phases of expansion and contraction. So of course, for a trade cycle to occur, we should have alternate upward and downward movement, expansion and contraction. If we just have expansion, we wouldn't reach, or we couldn't draw a trade cycle then. Next guys, they are violent in a capitalist economy. Of course, they are more violent and pronounced in a capitalist economy. Why? Because there is no government intervention to control these policies. And whereas in a socialist or a governmentally controlled economy, we have trade cycles which are more, not that pronounced or not that violent, because government can control the movement of these cycles. I forgot to discuss this point. There is no uniform cause for it. It can occur due to several reasons, not one reason. And lastly guys, policies like monetary and fiscal policies, which I'll be discussing in the latter part of this video, they can be used to actually curb these cycles so that they don't become very violent or pronounced, because of course too violent trade cycles are not good for the economy. So that's why we should have normal trade cycles. So now coming to the most important part of a trade cycle, which are the phases of trade cycles. There are 4 phases typically in a trade cycle guys. I'll be discussing one by one each of them. So we always begin with recovery. You might ask why, but that's how it's there in all the books. We always start with the recovery phase, when the economy is moving towards normalcy, back again. So this is a diagram which I've drawn for your reference so that you can keep in mind, look at that when I'm explaining you what exactly is recovery, also known as the revival phase. Okay, so this, as the name suggests guys, this phase is a phase when the economy is moving towards normalcy, from a depression phase. Now the economy is coming out and moving towards becoming normal in the economy. So you can say during the pandemic time, which happened in 2020 March, we can say maybe July, August, or maybe you can say August, September was a time when the economy actually started to recover, right? We were getting back to normal things. So in that case, what we happen, entrepreneurs start to increase their investment, which was not there before in the period which occurred before recovery. Now we see people are working towards increasing their income, increasing their output, their employment, prices start rising again, business optimism starts setting in. So we are not moving, we've not reached our destination, we are moving towards an expansion phase in the recovery phase. So an economy is coming out of the dull phase and moving towards an expansion phase. That middle phase is known as the recovery. Over here you can see this, while we are coming out of depression, moving upwards, this is the phase where we are in right now, which is the recovery phase. So now coming to the second phase of a business cycle, which is boom, expansion, prosperity. It's known by several names, guys. So basically at this particular point, the economy has reached where it was reaching through the recovery phase. Now in this part of the trade cycle, an economy is doing pretty well. There is increase in investment, there is increase in bank credit, there is increase in production. People would like to invest their money. They don't want to keep money in their hand, but they know they are going to get a good handsome return if they invest their money. So there is high investment, there is rise in price, there is rise in output, there is rise in income. So basically everything is on a rise in this particular phase. This is a very flourishing period for an economy. Over here you can see, guys, this is the expansion phase where we are at the topmost, we are at the peak of the situation. The economy is moving towards full employment, and there is a lot of business optimism in this particular phase, which means that people are ready to invest a lot, which they were little skeptical about in the previous phases. So now there's a lot of optimism, and as the name suggests, economy is doing pretty well. So moving ahead to our third phase of a business cycle, which is a recession phase. So first let me tell you, because I've seen often students tend to get confused between depression and recession. What is worse? Guys, of course, depression is a worst stage. A recession leads to a depression. Remember the depression of 1930s? So we are in a recessionary phase. We are moving down, and a deep and long prolonged recession period is known as a depression. So first recession comes and then depression, okay? So make sure that you remember that clearly. Now, of course, as revival was the onset of expansion, recession is the onset of a depressionary phase. In this, again, guys, what happens? Investment starts falling, the prices start falling, the income, output, employment, everything starts falling. There's a dull lull period in the economy. People, hesitate in investing because, there is a little of business pessimism which has stepped in this particular phase. We see now people wish to keep more cash in their hand rather than investing. The liquidity preference of people rise because they know they hardly going to get any return in this particular phase. People start to move back towards a little downside of the economy. Here we can see again from the top when we're coming down, this is particularly known as the recession phase. So I hope you're clear with that, guys. So lastly, guys, moving ahead to our last phase of a business cycle, which is the worst phase an economy can be in. So this phase is known as depression, and as the name suggests, this phase is very bad, as in very dull period for the economy. Everything is on a downfall, downside. Economic activity has typically fallen. The production, the employment, the output, the income, everything is falling. Over here we see, because income has fallen, there is a fall in the purchasing power. People are not able to demand goods. Over here there's a high wave of business pessimism. No one wants to invest anywhere. They just want to keep a lot of money with themselves, whatever they have, because in this phase the economy, people want to prefer liquidity, cash in hand, rather than investing. You remember that liquidity trap situation when the interest rate is so low that people don't wish to invest, rather than they want to keep money in their hand. And that is the phase, the COVID-19, when it started back in March 2020, March, April periods were a period of depressionary phase when economic activity had fallen due to the pandemic, the lockdown. So at that point of time we saw there was this depressionary phase where we can see in this particular diagram we are at the downside. We are actually in the bottom of the diagram. Over here there is a trough period when we've reached the lowest point, and that is a depressionary period. Post that, again we move towards recovery, again expansion, again a recession, again depression. And these wave-like movements, these four phases, they ideally make up how a business cycle operates. Now moving ahead to our last part of the video, which is the anti-cyclical policies, without which I thought, guys, that the trade cycles topic is pretty much incomplete, and that's why I should add this in this particular video itself. So what are anti-cyclical policies? What are cyclical fluctuations, trade cycles, and what are anti-cyclical policies? Those policies which are used to curb these cyclical fluctuations, okay, henceforth the name. So guys, first thing first, I have made 2 videos on monetary and fiscal policy, which are very much in detail and very much appreciated by you all. I'll be attaching the link in the description section section below. Please do watch out those videos in case you are unsure about what monetary and fiscal policy is. I will be discussing now as well, but there I have discussed pretty much in detail. So firstly guys, now Keynes mentions that why does a trade cycle occur? A trade cycle occurs due to the fluctuations in aggregate demand, and the fluctuations in aggregate demand can occur or can lead to two situations. One, an excess demand situation, and the other, a deficiency of demand situation. He says when there is a lot of demand for goods, that would lead an economy to come in an inflationary phase, whereas when there is deficiency of demand, we would step into a phase of deflation, a deflationary phase. These inflation and deflationary phases together combine and work together and comprise or make up a business cycle. We just did that business cycle wave-like fluctuations, right? So these movement in the demand, excess and deficiency leads to a business cycle. And how can we control a business cycle? We can control a business cycle through the anti-cyclical policies, which are monetary and fiscal policies. These two policies are used to curb inflation or to curb deflation, both of which are not good for the economy. Too much of anything is not good for the economy. A little bit of inflation, little bit of deflation would still work. Okay, so now I'll be discussing the monetary policy. Monetary policy, you should be knowing, it is a policy set by the RBI, okay, the central bank of the country. Basically in our country it's RBI. We have two types of monetary policy. One is an expansionary and one is a contractionary monetary policy. Of course, as the name suggests, an expansionary monetary policy is used in a phase when the economy is in a very deflationary period, dull period, the depression, recession period. To take out the economy, we have to use an expansionary monetary policy. Whereas when an economy is already in a very inflationary phase, prices are on a high, we need to curb the economy, and in that case, we are going to be using a contractionary monetary policy. There are some instruments to a monetary policy as to how we can control, the inflation and deflation. Number one being bank rate or discount rate, the rate at which the central bank lends to the commercial banks. So in this case, when it wants to expand credit, it will lower on the bank rate or discount rate because it wants commercial banks to further lend to the public, whereas vice versa situation will occur in an inflationary phase. Secondly, CRR. CRR stands for cash reserve ratio, the amount with the commercial banks have to keep with the central bank so as they can back on it in case of any emergency. So when there is an inflationary period, it will increase the CRR. Why will it do so? Because it wants to, the commercial banks to lend less to the public, and in that case it would increase CRR. Commercial banks are required to keep more with the central bank, and then they will have less money to lend to the public. In that way, they will control the inflation in the economy. Open market operation, a very key feature of monetary policy, which involves buying and selling of securities. In an inflationary period, what will it do? It will sell the securities. The central bank sells it so that it can absorb the excessive liquidity in the market, and it will absorb that cash by selling on the securities. Whereas in a deflationary period, it will buy the securities so as to inject liquidity in the economy. Repo rate and reverse repo rate, short-term loans given by RBI to the commercial banks. Okay, so repo rate, it will increase the repo rate during the phase of inflation and vice versa during deflation. Moving ahead to margin requirements, again this is a qualitative control or measure of how monetary policy works. Margin is basically the amount when you go to take a loan. Supposingly you mortgage your house for 50 lakh and the bank gives you 40 lakh loan in return. So when it wants that 10 lakh difference is the margin, when it wants that public should get more money in the hand, and when will they want that? In the case of a deflationary period, in that case they will reduce the margin to maybe just 5 lakh. For 50 lakh property, they will give you 45 lakh in hand probably. As in at this point of time, we notice guys, margin will be reduced, but when it wants to curb, that time the margin will be increased in an inflationary period. And lastly, moral suasion. Central banks can also move towards controlling that through moral suasion. They can scold on, or they can cancel the banking license of commercial banks if they not adhere to the policies. All thus a central bank does so as to control inflation or control deflation in an economy. So I hope you are clear with how a monetary policy works, to control inflation and deflation. I've also made a video on inflation and deflation. I can attach the link in the comment section below. All these topics, monetary, fiscal policy, inflation, deflation, trade cycle, accelerator, multiplier, all of them are interlinked, guys. All of them are macro topics and all of them are pretty much important. So you need to know each of them so as to know all of them. So yeah. So now guys, coming to the last part of our video, which is the fiscal policy. So fiscal policy is also an anti-cyclical policy which is used to control the inflation or deflation in an economy. So fiscal policy, you should be knowing that it is set by the government of the country, and as I tell my students, I'm telling you as well that fiscal policy, the word fiscal policy should remind you of two things, which is the policy of taxation and public expenditure, and you should keep that in mind always. Like monetary policy, fiscal policy also has two phases, the expansionary and the contractionary, and of course we will use an expansionary phase when the economy is in a very deflationary period, whereas we use a contractionary fiscal policy when already there's too much money supply in the economy and we want to curb it by using a contractionary fiscal policy. Okay, so two things are there, taxation and public expenditure. They always move vice versa, so I'll explain you that. So what happens is during a deflationary period, there is a dull period, there is lack of money supply. We will use an expansionary fiscal policy, and that what we will do, we will reduce the taxation and increase the public expenditure. Vice versa, I just told you. So basically what will happen in this particular phase, the government tends to reduce taxes so that people have more money in their hand to spend, whereas government increases the public expenditure. Government spends so much money on public, like building roads, dams, railways, highways. So in this particular phase of an expansionary fiscal policy, in a depressionary period, the government will expand its public expenditure, whereas vice versa now will happen when we are in an inflationary phase. At this point of time, guys, we wish to use a contractionary fiscal policy so as to curb the economy from the excessive money supply which it is in. So in this case, what will happen now, we will raise the taxes so that to withdraw money or basically absorb money from the hands of the people. Taxes बढ़ जाएंगे, so of course prices rise and people have less money in their hand, and in this situation we will reduce the public expenditure. Government should reduce public expenditure in a case where already we are in an inflationary period. So this is all about a fiscal policy. How is it used to control a business cycle, a depressionary, an inflationary, deflationary, whatever you can call period. So I hope, guys, this video was useful for you. If it was, please do like this video and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next video pretty soon.